If we get rid of property tax and graduated income tax, it's going to make Georgia all that much more appealing to businesses to want to come and set up shop here in Georgia and to bring their jobs here to Georgians. No one has asked yet about the subject of education, so since I think it's tangentially connected, let me go ahead and throw that in. On the subject of education, I've been an educator, as I said, for more than 10 years. I taught in both government schools and private schools. I've taught at both the high school and the college level. I believe the key here in Georgia is, number one, more competition. I believe competition is always good in any area of life. I think we need to continue to encourage not just public education, but private education, Christian education, and homeschool education. One of my opponents in the race is from down here in your neck of the woods. Senator Eric Johnson, as you know, put forth the school voucher bill. I think that's a very good step in the right direction. The school voucher bill currently doesn't extend to most private schools and certainly not homeschoolers at all, but it does begin to open the door there. I think school vouchers is a step in the right direction, but what I think would be a better solution in encouraging competition would be tax credits of some sort, because if you had the tax credits, then you wouldn't have to have the strings attached from Atlanta, the rules like vouchers have. If private schools wanted to take vouchers from the state of Georgia, they'd have to follow whatever rules and regulations and guidelines were attached to those vouchers. And I personally know there are a lot of private schools and Christian schools that quite frankly don't want the government telling them how to educate your children. And that's why you send them, if you do, to a Christian school or a private school. And so there are a lot of schools that are not going to participate in the voucher system, even if it does open up for them to be able to do so. So I think tax credits or tax incentives in some way is a better solution. Besides increasing competition in the area of education, I think the other answer is returning control of education back to the local level. I mean, let's face it, parents and their teachers who work with the children every day are much better judges of what your children in your community need than someone in Atlanta or Washington, either one. If we went to that simple sales tax so that all the taxes were collected at the local level, if we did it properly and did not require all the money to be sent to Atlanta in the first place so that Atlanta could tell you what you had to do to get your own education money back, then it would return control back to the people, back to your local area. You could decide what textbooks you use. You could decide what view of the origins of life you teach in your science classrooms. You could decide whether you have prayer before the football game Friday night or not, instead of Atlanta or Washington telling you what you have to do in order to get your own money back. By the way, I have people always that say, well, Ray, if we do that, isn't the federal government going to cut off our funding for education to Georgia? Well, I don't know if you already know this or not, and I don't know the exact numbers for here in Savannah, but I can tell you that across the state of Georgia, on average, each local school district gets about 3% of their school budget from the federal government. Now, what percentage of the rules and regulations do you think come from Washington? Probably about 90%, or maybe better than that. So for 3% of our budget, we're giving them total control over everything we do and teach. I personally think we can go to bat and get back that 3% and not have it go into Washington in the first place. And I'll give you that solution in a minute. But even if we couldn't get back that 3%, wouldn't it be worth it to regain our liberties and regain the ability to teach our own children, our own culture, our own valuable way of life, without Washington or Atlanta telling us what we have to do to get our money back? Wouldn't it be worth giving up that 3%? I hope that Americans today, and Georgians in particular, believe that 3% of the budget is a small price to pay for our liberties and regaining control of our own destinies as a sovereign state. I believe Georgians, many Georgians would feel that way. I hope we can awake the others that aren't quite there with us yet. There are some solutions to keeping money out of the hands of Washington in the first place. You might have already heard the story. About a month and a half ago, Washington told the state of Georgia that in order to get our federal highway funds, we're going to have to start putting more traffic on the HOV lanes through downtown Atlanta because we're just not putting enough cars on the HOV lanes. We have too much traffic on the other lanes. We're not using them wisely. Well, here's the problem with that. First of all, do you know where they get the federal highway funds that come back to us? They come from collecting the motor fuel tax across the state of Georgia. And then all of the retailers have to send that motor fuel tax in directly to Washington. And then they tell us what we have to do, what rules we have to follow to get our own federal highway funds back. Now, if anybody else took your money and then told you what you have to do to get your own money back, you'd call it extortion, bribery, thievery, a whole host of things. But yet that's what happens to us every day. I also don't know if you know this or not, but even when we follow their rules, Georgia doesn't get back all of our motor fuel tax. We're what's called a donor state. Did you know you were a donor state? You didn't even know you were. Even when you follow their rules, you get back 90 cents on the dollar here in Georgia for what we send in to the federal government. That other 10 cents goes to Massachusetts or California or some other group of people that deserve your money more than you do. They do deserve it more, right? No, they don't. Any other time in American history, we'd call that communism. That's exactly what it is today. It doesn't matter if it's somebody in another country taking your money or if it's somebody that they're sending it to in another state. It's your money. We deserve to be able to use our resources right here in Georgia. The solution, though, is that whoever controls the money has the power. What we've got to do is get away from sending all those tax dollars directly to Washington in the first place so that they can't hold that over our heads. If we take away those taxes, we take away their power. One of the bills that our campaign in the governor's race has already put together, one of 10 different state sovereignty bills that we'll be introducing in the General Assembly in January from this campaign, is a bill entitled the State Authority and Federal Tax Funds Act. This act would require that all federal taxes be sent, that are owed by Georgians, be sent to the Georgia Department of Revenue. And the General Assembly will be empowered to determine what federal appropriations are constitutional, and only that percentage of federal appropriations that are constitutional will be forwarded on to the different branches of the federal government for them to use. Now, that's the way it was done in American history for the first 100 years anyway. Individuals did not pay taxes directly to the federal government. What few taxes were paid to the state, and the state paid the federal government those few taxes that were required at that time. If we return to that way of doing business and we keep that money out of their hands in the first place, they can't hold that over our heads, and they lose the majority of the power they have over our lives when we keep our tax money here at home. And by the way, if that money is kept here, whatever is not constitutional to be sent off, it can either be used for things here at home that are constitutional and needful, or be returned directly to the taxpayers where they should be, where it should be in the first place. So I'll get your question in just a second. We have 10 different state sovereignty bills. We're introducing a different one every week for 10 weeks. We've already introduced the first 4. If you're interested in listening to the new bill that we'll be introducing every Sunday night, there's a phone call. I'm on the phone live with whoever wants to call in and listen in on the conference call. There's an actual number on the campaign website. You can call in. You'll see the icon on the front page that says Sunday Evenings with Ray. You can look up the phone number. All you have to do is call in and listen, and we'll talk about the new bill that will be introduced. But we have 10 different state sovereignty bills. They will be introduced in the General Assembly in January. Some of them already have bill numbers. Some of them are still with Legislative Council being assigned bill numbers. All 10 of them already have sponsorship in the Georgia House. So it's exciting, folks. We're trying to make a difference. We understand that the governor by himself can't do it. We're, as far as we know, the only campaign in the history of Georgia politics to be introducing legislation, even though we're not